It seems President Joe Biden is guilty of contributing to the multiple narratives surrounding the Israel-Palestine conflict. A recent Washington Post report revealed that Biden was advised not to talk about the beheaded baby story because it was unconfirmed, but he chose to ignore that advice. He also has privately admitted he was wrong to publicly question the Palestinian death toll. So these are from a couple of stories that have come out over the course of the holiday weekend. The first one, he was advised before he made that speech a few weeks ago, that very strong in support of Israel's speech in the wake of October 7th, that he had personally witnessed the 40 beheaded babies. He was apparently not just corrected after the fact, but told beforehand by his own advisors, don't say that, it's unconfirmed. He chose to say it anyway. That comes out in a recent story. And then perhaps more relevant to what's going on currently is this other story that says that behind the scenes, he is acknowledging that he was wrong to publicly question whether or not the Hamas medical authority, the only medical authority that exists in Gaza's reporting of how many people had died in Gaza, was reputable. Remember, after he said, if we can question Hamas, threw into question those numbers, all of the media reporting, an media accounting group went through and found all of the instances in which the death toll in Gaza was reported. And there was a marked shift in the proportion of caveats that journalists put on the death toll numbers after Joe Biden threw them into question. And now, of course, there's been pushback. The Palestinian death toll numbers have historically been in line with what independent corroborators have been able to find after the fact of various tragedies over time. That's why they were credited in the first place. But despite having integrity historically, now there's a lot more skepticism about those numbers that can be tied directly to Joe Biden's own skepticism there.
Sure, I think it was wrong to downplay the casualty estimates in general, just because things are usually always worse than reported. We're seeing images and there's more that we're not seeing going on. I don't know that this puts the Gaza, I still think the Gaza Health Ministry should be taken with a grain of salt. I saw reporting over the weekend that now the Human Rights Watch, which is an internationally renowned human rights organization, says, for instance, that they were able to confirm, based on their investigation, that that hospital explosion we debated, or the media debated endlessly from a few weeks ago, was in fact caused by a misfired Palestinian rocket, and that the death total there was far under what was reported. So I think where Joe Biden goes wrong is making blanket or asserting statements. In general, we have a fog of war situation. We ought to be very careful. And I agree with you that he got ahead of his skis on both of those issues.
It's not just that. It's that he knew, he was warned in advance. And this is something we've seen of Biden before. You hear him in speeches saying things like, they don't want me to say this, but, and then he'll go on. Mm-hmm. Or they don't like it when I tell this story, but this one time I was a lifeguard and all the black kids love to touch my blonde leg hairs. He loves to tell these stories.
Sometimes we like to know that he's not just a mouthpiece for his handlers.
Sure, but sometimes your handlers are leading you in the right direction. Sometimes they're letting you know that you've got something factually wrong. Sometimes they're telling you that the weird story you keep telling about the pool isn't going over with voters in the way that you think it is. And in cases like this, I think people are frustrated because he does have this incredible influence as the President of the United States of America, not just in setting the tone of the media coverage in this country and around the world, but more specifically to affect Israeli policy that has led directly to all of these deaths in Gaza. So a little bit more color here. The Washington Post reported that this came out because he had met with some prominent Muslim Americans after his speech, who, the Post writes, protested what they saw as his insensitivity to the civilians who were dying. All spoke of people they knew who had been affected by the suffering in Gaza, including a woman who had lost 100 members of her family. Biden appeared to be affected by their account. I'm sorry, I'm disappointed in myself, he told the group, according to two people familiar with the meeting. I will do better. Now, some people look at that and say, oh, he has empathy. He's the classic empathetic Joe Biden. Other people look at that and say, why did it take you? You're seeing the reporting of how many people are dying. You know that Justin Amash's family members were killed. You can talk to Rashida Tlaib right there in Congress anytime that you want. Why did it take this meeting for you to finally hear what Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans specifically, have been saying all of this time? And then the other part that they have concern about is, you say you will do better. Has he done better since this meeting, which happened relatively shortly after October 7th? Now we're over a month out from this crisis, and many people feel as though he has not used his power of the presidency the way that other presidents have in the past, including Ronald Reagan, to use that leverage to affect what's going on in Gaza. So we're in the middle of this temporary ceasefire. There's some debate about whether or not it's going to get extended. Joe Biden says, I'm hopeful that it's extended. I'm hopeful that it's extended. Okay, well, why not say we're going to withhold aid unless you extend it or make it permanent? That we're going to condition aid. This is a debate that's happening right now in Congress, whether or not we should condition the aid when U.S. law is already that all aid is conditioned on it not being used to execute war crimes and violate international law.
I mean, one can't help but come to the conclusion that Joe Biden is a very weak president who's bullied by international political figures who are like Zelensky as well, who have received tons of support, financial support from the U.S. taxpayer and do whatever they want anyway. Including, again, potentially we're still debating the Nord Stream and if the U.S. was involved in that. One line says we were not involved in that, and they did this of their own accord, even though we didn't want it, although some officials may have wanted it. It's more complicated than that. They have suspended opposition parties and opposition media, and then Israel, too, doing a lot of things that I think the U.S. government should rationally worry is going to further embolden terrorism and harm our own security interests. And it's like, well, no, we just give them the money. We might ask, maybe you could do it this way, maybe you could do it that way, but it's theirs. As you point out, that's not how previous presidents, that's not how Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush treated their relationship with Israel and with other countries. The idea was this money ought to be conditional. One starts to worry that American taxpayers are treated like the biggest chumps on the face of the earth, giving unconditionally in return for what? In return for nothing. I've pointed this out before, but we also fund the humanitarian effort to rescue Gaza after this. We blow them up. We pay for blowing them up, which doesn't make us safer, and then we pay for rebuilding them. We pay it all. Yeah. Why?
Yeah, and look, we're talking 1.7 million out of the 2.3 now that are internally displaced. People in the ceasefire are trying to go back to their homes to find absolutely nothing there, unrecognizable neighborhoods. You have, I believe it was Yoav Gallant, who's this, I think, defense minister that we've referenced a lot in Israel, saying that after the ceasefire ends, the intention is to go strike harder and siege Gaza harder than they were doing so before. At the same time that you're having these prisoner releases and exchanges, the same number of Palestinians that have been imprisoned, including a large number of women and children, are being rounded up and imprisoned taken from the West Bank, so that they're keeping the same number ultimately of Palestinians in captivity, despite letting some of them out in exchange for all of the Israeli hostages. You have a recent clip from the last couple of days of Netanyahu saying that he is the only one arguing internally to his opponents in Israel and the people who might support him, that only he can prevent a two-state solution, only he can prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. This is the context of what's going on there. At the same time, Biden saying, well, I'm hopeful that the ceasefire will extend. I'm hopeful we can have a two-state solution. Not looking at the reality either intentionally or because he's an incompetent leader. I don't know what other way to put it. The reality of what's before him and not using any of American leverage.
He's been part of the blob, the bipartisan foreign policy consensus, for decades. Yeah. He's gone along with, except in finally he got in the Afghanistan pullout, although it was Trump who committed to that, he's merely agreed to execute it at long last. The U.S. gaining nothing in that entire war effort. But apart from that, he's been part of the. There's some been reporting that maybe he warned Obama about the Libya disaster, and Obama listened to Hillary Clinton, but he wasn't persuaded. Another example of him not leveraging any of his power to achieve a more desirable foreign policy outcome for the U.S.
Yeah.
So honestly, we knew what we were getting into with this guy, but here we are.
Some of us did. All right, stick around. More Rising for you right after this.